Hi, my name's Regan,
And I'm Sam.
and you're watching the First for Knowledge show.
And today we're joined with the amazing Gillian and Edward in sunny Aberdeen.
Stay tuned.
Hello and welcome everybody to our first Thirst for Knowledge show. We're joined today by the amazing Edward and Gillian, both of them experts in their domain. So love to welcome them to the show with us. Obviously I have my co-host Regan here as well. Let's kick this off. Today, we want to talk about culture. We want to talk about the new normal in business, how that feels for employers, how that feels for employees, how we bring the two together. So before we do that, though, why don't we start by both of you introducing yourselves, telling us what you do, and just a little bit about yourself.
I'm Gillian Thomson. I run a couple of businesses. So one, which is an executive coaching and leadership development business called Fearless Edge. And I have another with my business partner, Dave Wynn, Heart-Centered Leaders. I would say the consistent thing about them is that I work primarily with leaders, business owners, usually, but not exclusively, who come from technical and leadership, technical and specialist backgrounds, and are facing the challenge of having to be able to let go of what they've always been rewarded for, their expertise, their knowledge throughout their careers, to enable them to be really effective leaders. So that's the kind of sweet spot that I like to work in.
Yeah, Edward Obi, I own two separate companies, and they're all about people. The first one, HR Hub Plus, is a HR consultancy that supports business owners so that they're not leaving themselves exposed to unnecessary employment tribunal claims. So I interact with business owners, line managers, and employees, depending on the situation. And then there's the second part, which is Peridot Recruit. It's not a recruitment agency, but just acts as a recruitment online advertiser for local businesses, providing talent at a cost-effective price. So that's what we do. It's all about people either managing or recruiting and retaining.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So I think this is the key here, and this is why we brought you two on together, was that you are very people focused. And I think that's the beauty of it. And I think in this ever-changing world, we need to be people focused. Is that something which you felt really since the beginning of the pandemic, where a lot has changed? People have been working from home. There's more remote working now. Is that how do we focus that now more on people again?
I think so. A phrase you often hear in organizations is people are our biggest asset. And often there's a lot of lip service paid to that, and actually their actions, their culture don't reflect that. And I think not just through the last 2 years where we've been working through the pandemic, where there has been focus on how people are working, when they're working, how they're working together, how you do that effectively. As we move out and we come into this more hybrid approach of working, there's questions I think that organizations will need to ask themselves about, of all the work that we're doing, what needs to be done together? What do we need to collaborate on together? What do we need to collaborate on at the same time as each other? What do we need to collaborate on in the same place as each other? And asking those questions and thinking about what does that mean for our culture? How does it align with our business values? Is going to be really key going forward.
Yeah, that's I can concur with that. And another key thing that I picked up from what Gillian said is, some people have this tick box culture. People are our focus, and, we value our employees. We have open, honest feedback systems in place. But in reality, it's actually the reverse. And obviously, since the pandemic, you can look at it from two sides. Those who had a strong culture in place, and then the pandemic came, how they tried to maintain that through that remote working scenario. And then those that didn't have a strong culture in place, and how that impacted on employees also out with the workplace environment. So yeah, it's really one of those in-depth topics that really need to take a little bit of scrutiny to.
So that's an interesting point, you know, that in depth, and hopefully we can touch on this throughout this discussion. But it's, you know, where do you start as an employer to actually solve this issue? How do we, and you know, perhaps as well as how do employees support that?
I think for me, it comes down to getting real clarity on what's the purpose and what are the values that are important to you as an organization and as a leader. Because that then drives everything that you do. More and more I talk to my colleagues that are in recruitment, and they say actually people aren't necessarily asking about the things that they used to ask about, like package, benefits, etc. They're asking about what's the purpose of this organization? How am I creating meaning in what I'm doing? They're also asking about what are the flexible and hybrid working policies, and that's really important for people at the moment. And so I think as leaders, it can be really challenging and overwhelming sometimes about like, where do I start? But if you've got real clarity on your purpose and you've got real clarity on your values, that then becomes the decision-making framework for everything else.
Yeah, and you know, when you take a look about leadership, you know, it's how committed they are, because when you talk about culture, it has to start from the very top, and then everyone within the organization embraces it and buys into it. And if there's a disconnect between what the leadership is actually saying and what's actually happening, because the employees are in that environment anyway, then they will just disconnect totally from it.
So maybe this is a point we should have touched on first, but, you know, really for people who might not know this, what is culture at its core? Is it, you know, is that, because it sounds, you know, people can give definitions of it, but truly, what is it?
I think, you know, when you talk about company culture, it's all about what makes the organization tick. Are they respectful to employees? Do they provide a conducive workplace environment, a safe place to work? How open are they to feedback? You know, do they have an open forum where they interact with people? So it all depends, just like what Gillian said. What's the focus? What do you want as an initial vantage point for your organizations to see? They need to see something to connect with you, to feel part and parcel of that organization. Now, different organizations have different focuses, and whatever that focus is, it's all about amplifying it to make sure it resonates with the people within the organization. Gillian?
So building on what you said there, I think it's been interesting this last 2 years, because if you'd asked me prior to the pandemic, what does culture mean in an organization, I would have said it's the conversations that happen at the water cooler. It's the unwritten rules, it's the way things get done around here. It's all that, as well as the stuff that's written down. It's actually, how do things work around here? How do decisions get made? What are the values that we're either explicitly or implicitly holding to when we're doing that, or reflecting when we're doing that? And so yeah, over the last 2 years, we've not had the water cooler conversations, but we've still demonstrated our culture and how we've made decisions, how we've focused our time, what we've rewarded, what behaviours we're rewarding, where as leaders we're demonstrating, etc. I always say, like, when I'm working on with businesses on values and things like that, it's all very well having a nice shiny poster up on the wall, but if you're not living and breathing those values every single day, then it means nothing. And so we can have toxic cultures, and we can have supportive cultures. And Edward described some of the traits, I think, of supportive workplace cultures, which are around that safety. So that's a big theme for me at the moment, talking to leaders about how do you build psychological safety? How do you make it a place where people feel like they can express their opinions, share their views, make mistakes and learn from them, have different thoughts and opinions to others and know that they'll be embraced and feel comfortable speaking up? And how do you build trust in organizations as well? So as a leader, how do I trust my team? That has been so important during the pandemic, because You're not sat beside them looking over their shoulder, which depending on the culture you might have been doing. You've not been able to do that micromanaging, which again is often a challenge that people coming from technical backgrounds have. And so how do you trust your team, and how do you build trust in the team in you? It's been really key.
So, silly question, how do you build trust in the team?
There are loads and loads of models around trust out there. There's a few that I really love and use a lot with teams. One is Brene Brown's model, trust, the Braving inventory. I'll just say the headings. If people are interested, they can go and look it up. But boundaries, reliability, accountability, vault, which is kind of about being able to keep confidences, integrity, non-judgment, and generosity. And so there in her research, that's what she's shown are the 7 elements that make up trust. So often if people are coming to me and they've got a difficult relationship, or they're wanting to build trust in the team, I get them to do a bit of an audit on all 7 of those. And like, if you were to score that out of 10 for this relationship or for this team, where would you score it? And then get them thinking about what can you do to move some of those upwards, or where are the areas you might need to focus. You might have people or a relationship where actually, you know what, someone's really reliable and accountable. I know that they'll get things done, but you know what, I wouldn't trust them to look after my dog. or I wouldn't trust them with a confidence because they're a bit of a gossip or whatever. Like, so then you can start to see actually there's particular areas of trust that you might need to focus on. In my experience, the ones that make the biggest difference to culture are the last 2. So non-judgment and generosity. So I'll dig into them in a bit more detail. So non-judgment is about creating an environment where I can share my opinion with you, and I know that you're not going to judge it or get defensive or react badly to it. And actually, you might not agree with it, and that's okay, but we can have an open, curious conversation where we explore each other's views, and we know that we're not going to judge each other. And then generosity, and in my role as a workplace mediator, and I know Edward will have experienced similar, is that I call it the best friend test. Brene describes it as assuming the most generous interpretation of events. I'll often say to people, if your best friend had done that or said that, what might their reasons have been? Yeah, because often where we've got a relationship where trust is low or we've got conflict, we've got this lens on where we're automatically assuming the worst of people. And if we can start to shift that, and we can start to think about, okay, I maybe didn't like what they did, or I maybe reacted negatively to what they did, but what might the positive intent have been here? Because usually the vast majority of people, there's always the 1 or 2, but the vast majority of people don't come to work to do a crap job and piss off their teammates. They want to do a good job. They want to work in an environment where they get on well with people. So if you can figure out what might that different interpretation be versus the story that I've told myself about the negative thing that they're doing or their negative reason for it.
That seems to resonate with you, Edward. Do you want to develop that?
Yeah, I think when it comes to building that trust, it all depends on the workplace environment. And if it needs to start from the leadership team, if they're not trustworthy, or the employees perceive them as not being trustworthy, then they won't be trustworthy. They just adapt to the environment. It's just like kids. Kids just see what you do and act alongside it. And then, when something happens, you then try and, bring in the conduct card or capability card. And then, let's say, well, I did it because you do it. I thought it was acceptable because I see you do it most of the time. So when you want to build trust in an organization, I've always believed you have to start from yourself as the leader of that organization and line manager. And then it then trickles down, because people then see you and say, wow, okay, it's very, very crystal clear. So take, for example, if you're a line manager and you're always early, whether it's 5, 10, 15 minutes early, the staff will see that and try to adapt with that. But if you're always late, they then say, oh, he's not going to be in anyway. And some, depending on the environment, decide to mirror that image. So when it's all about trust, it's very hard, because human beings being what we are, it's very, very hard to trust people, especially when you give someone a remit, an important remit within an organization. And, if they're not fulfilling that or being held accountable while they're there, during the remote time, they can just log on their computer. You'll think they're on, and they might just be watching Netflix or, playing a game or something. So it all depends on how, the leadership view and interpret that trust and trickle it down to the organization. As an individual, I'm not a micromanager. I don't micromanage people. I delegate a task, you do it. I'm happy with that. And then maybe you can be proactive and do other things. That's basically fine. Because, you need to really trust your employees to actually perform whatever you've delegated to them. And if you're running an organization and there's no trust there, you won't be able to go out for meetings. You want to hold meetings in the office via Zoom, or you won't be able to take holidays, because you'll be like, if I take holidays now, I might come back and see the office in shambles. So it all depends on how you communicate that. And that's why inductions are very, very key. From the very beginning, you communicate your values and what the expectations are. And then they key into that from day one. And then they just manage and align with it as they progress.
Just building on that, I think what some of the kind of stories and stuff that's making the news at the moment about people returning to the office, and comments are being made around everybody needs to be back to the office, or organizations where that's not the case. And I think part of the challenge is, as Edward said, actually, some leaders have concerns that people are sat at home watching Netflix when they're supposed to be working. And I think, actually, if as a leader you've built a culture where people are feeling motivated and engaged and trusted, they want to do a good job, they want to deliver. People feel rewarded when they're they feel motivated when they're doing that, when they're in flow, when they're creating good work, when they're making connections with people. Dan Pink did some work around motivation, and the 3 things. So what he discovered is that actually, once you pay people enough money that they can pay their bills and they feel comfortable, then money is no longer a motivator for people. The 3 things that motivate people are purpose. So can I connect with what the business is doing, the meaning behind it? I always love the story about JFK going to NASA and asking the janitor what he's doing, and the janitor replies, I'm helping put a man on the moon. If you can help your team feel that much of a connection to the sense of purpose in an organization, they're going to want to deliver. The second is mastery. So do I have the opportunity to be really good at what I do, an expert at what I do, and the stuff that makes me gives me joy, makes me get into flow, that type of thing. And then the third one is autonomy. So do I have the ability to make decisions about how and when I work, what I work on, etc. And that's where I think what Edward said is really important. Actually, as a leader, setting expectations, you're kind of setting the boundaries. If you imagine it as a box, this is what I expect. Here's the framework that I want you to work within. Here's what I need delivered, but how you do it, when you do it, that's the bit that then there's flexibility and autonomy around. And I think if you're able to build that kind of culture, then actually if people maybe take an hour off in the middle of the day to watch a Netflix, they're probably making it up or doing the work at some other time if they're feeling that level of engagement. And actually getting away from the how much time are people spending, and actually what's the output is much more important.
Absolutely. I think I've seen that more and more in, obviously sitting on LinkedIn, you see a lot of stuff about that. And that output piece has been a lot more predominant lately than just the number of hours worked. And I think in my mind, at least, it ties into this sort of work-life balance. I know, Gillian, you do a lot around that as well, but how do we find this work-life balance when we are working from home, when perhaps, we think, well, we should start at 9 and we should work all the way through to 5 because we're not commuting, we don't have any other distractions, although we might have more distractions at home. But, how do we actually find that balance? And Edward, perhaps from a legal perspective, what are the implications there for employers in finding that work-life balance?
I think the most important thing is, irrespective of where the work location is, the organization has a duty of care to support the employee, irrespective of the location. Now, it takes us back to the very beginning, whereby an organization needs to reinforce and focus on the culture they really, really want to develop. So, over the last 2 years, there's been this working from home scenario. So I've always said, if normally you would have, how can I put it? You would meet for lunch every week as a team. Nothing stops you from doing that virtually. Everybody just logs on, you still have the lunch, still have the conversation. It's all about trying to focus on what's really important. If you have weekly meetings, nothing stops you from doing that within the time frame. There are various platforms and tools that showcase maybe workplace, Microsoft Teams or Workspace by Facebook. You can actually see what your employees are doing irrespective of their location. There's a central point. This is what I'm doing today. You don't really need to micromanage it. Because, loneliness is one of the things that came out of this pandemic scenario. People were at home all alone, staring at the four walls, no interaction with anybody, depending on, your personal circumstances. And imagine if you were used to some sort of behavior at work, collective community behavior, and then overnight, you're no longer used to that. It's very, very concerning. And, it's all about finding a way to support the employees irrespective of their location. Because like I said earlier, an employer has a duty of care. How would you gauge somebody's mental state if you're not speaking to them constantly as you would normally have done? Yes, the pandemic came around, people didn't expect it. They were actually expecting Brexit to happen. And then all of a sudden, there was lockdown and things just changed. So, it's all about adapting to it and being supportive, because that's the most important thing.
I think work-life balance is quite interesting. I used it a lot, but actually my thinking was changed a bit by a comment somebody made on someone else's post recently about, actually, whenever you talk about balance, you talk about one or the other. It's like, if this is up here, then that's down there, and vice versa. And actually, what this person talked about was harmony. And actually, we want to have harmony between all the elements of our life, and that doesn't necessarily mean giving and taking from one, but it might change. Like what is harmony one day for me might be different another day. If I'm 20 and I don't have any dependents and I love to travel, what harmony looks like for me then will be very different to when I'm in my 30s and I've got kids and I've got caring responsibilities, or I've got elderly parents that I need to look after, things like that. So throughout our working life cycle, that looks very different, and organizations need to be able to support all ends of the spectrum. I think I talk a lot about work life and mental health, and I feel like there is this a mental health pandemic potentially coming post the pandemic, and I feel really passionately that companies need to be doing more around that. So it's not just good enough to have a corporate Headspace account and a yoga class once a week and a free massage. It's actually about looking at the workload, looking at, is this realistic for somebody to do within whatever boundaries we've set for their working time? If not, how do we change that? Do we need more staff? Do we need to deprioritize some stuff and really just focus on the one or two things that are really important? What we're doing, what I think it's great that we're talking about mental health as organizations more. I feel like a lot of what we're doing is sticking plasters on the symptoms rather than getting to the real root cause of what the challenges are. And so taking at that kind of cold hard look about what are we asking people to do? How are we helping them create harmony within their whole life? How are we supporting them through the different stages of their careers is really important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just wanted to kind of touch on that there because I'm big on mental health. I think that I completely agree. More things should be done within organizations, but I don't know, as an organization, if, you know, the pair of you had, I don't know, 3 things that you would say, I know there's like so many priorities, but like 3 things that would benefit, just as a kind of tell the audience sort of thing, and a place where they can get started, really.
I think the first one is creating an enabling environment with the team. You see polls or surveys being conducted. Some employees are not comfortable enough discussing personal issues with line managers, for example, or business owners. And that's because the conducive environment has not been set. So they need to start from, you know, having, if it's a weekly hangout within the organization, something not formal, something relaxed, you know, it's a gradual process that gets people having that conversation. And that's very, very important, because you don't just come in and say, here's a policy, this is what we do. No, there needs to be a conversation. There needs to be interaction. People need to buy into it. They need to know that you're genuinely there to support them, because individuals pick things up pretty quickly. If they just feel it's a tick box exercise, they'll just switch off. And you go to a meeting, nobody would just say a word. But it's gradual. And that's where leaders come in. It's very, very important. So if nobody's Superman, no one's Usain Bolt, you know, even athletics get time to take time out to recharge and stuff. So if you're a leader, you know, it doesn't devalue your position if you just say, team, you know, I'm just taking time out to recharge because I'm facing this sort of issue. And people will be like, wow, okay. And then, you know, if you then do it from your side, you know, gradually, I'm not saying it might be an immediate thing, but people recognize that they want to be as supportive as they can. And if the roles are reversed, you will also be as supportive as you can from an organizational perspective. So that's just one point. I'll allow Gillian to say something else.
Yeah, we build on what you said. I think key for me is that we talked about it briefly earlier, but creating that psychologically safe environment where people feel able to speak up, and that might be speaking up about their mental health. And what we know is that psychological safety isn't the same across an organization. It's very much dependent on the individual leader that you're working for. So it's kind of team-based. So as a leader, it is about role modeling that, as Edward said. So, and that can require being a bit vulnerable. It can require sharing, you know what, I need to take a mental health day today. I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. It can be being clear about boundaries, saying I'm switching off at 4 o'clock or 5, whenever is the right time for you, and not replying to emails, not expecting others to. I think one of the challenges that we can get into is, again, a bit of lip service to that, is that we don't realize as leaders that our words might say one thing, but our actions say another, and people are much more likely to follow our actions. And so if we have at the bottom of our email signature, reply to this email at a time that suits you, I might be sending it at 10 o'clock at night or 5 o'clock in the morning. Okay, it might give me a bit more permission to do that, but the reality is I'm seeing you do that as a leader. I'm seeing you make that behavior okay. And there are ways you can get around that through scheduling, emails and things like that is just one little example. But being really aware of a leader as to what behavior you're role modeling, because that will be what your team pick up on. The other thing I would say is this flexibility piece. So one size does not fit all. Right? We're talking a lot about 4-day work weeks at the moment, or other, like I said, everybody has different requirements throughout their career. And if you can create ways of working as an organization that enable that flexibility, which for some people might be a 4-day work week. For other people, it might be actually, I'd rather work 5 days, but school hours only. Or it might be, you know what, I'd love to take school holidays off, or I'd rather work from lunchtime till 8 o'clock at night. There's depending on people's circumstances, that's going to drive what works for them. So I do have a bit of reservation about a lot of the, whilst I think they're brilliant initiatives to try, I think what we risk losing is the flexibility, which I think is most important to people.
So for what I'm hearing here, it's a lot of leaders being more self-aware, perhaps, and taking the time to actually have that introspective moment and look at themselves before just trying to, put a policy in place or do something. How, as a leader, do you do that? Obviously, the leaders I see in my day-to-day life, very busy, constantly on the move, doing stuff. How do you take that time out to say, right, well, I need to spend, a day on myself, or I need to actually take that time to look inside me and see what's happening?
I have a mantra around that, which is called slow down to speed up. And it's actually the name of one of the modules in our Heart-Centered Leaders program. So the focus, our focus for the entire first half of that program is on you as a leader. It's not about how you're managing your team. It's not about how you're dealing with conflict or performance or feedback, things like that. It's about building that self-awareness of you as a leader and how you want to be as a leader. And one of the things we know is that if we're busy, if we're down in the weeds, if we've got too many priorities that we're working on, we're not taking that time, as a leader, to kind of step out of the weeds and think strategically, but also to take care of ourselves. And if we're not taking care of ourselves, we can't be there to support others. It's that metaphor, like put your own oxygen mask on first before you help anybody else. And so for me, that's one of the keys. All my clients I'm working with, and it's we have this culture, not just in business, but generally as a culture of busyness, where actually addiction to work is the one addiction that's really rewarded. And it's a badge of honor, yeah. And actually, we need to really shift that. We need to find that harmony between all of our different elements of our life.
Yeah, to touch on that personally, I believe in promoting an organization of self-care. There needs to be a balance. I'll use myself as an example. I never respond to any emails after 5:30 p.m. I've got 2 mobile phone, 1 business, 1 personal. Once it's 5:30, I switch the business phone off, put my out of office on, and that's it, because you need to regenerate yourself, because as we all know, HR is a mentally intensive sector. You're reviewing issues on a day-by-day basis. Nobody wants to be burnt out. And, if people then see you working, pushing yourself to the limit, they might feel, oh my God, I have to do that as well. And then you're sending the wrong message. The message is, look, we've got working times here. After your working time, go and be free to do whatever you want to do. Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, I go to Aberdeen Sports Village and play squash. So, to me, that's important after a day's work, to just go and let off some steam. And I do that with a couple of friends, or I go and play table tennis, or just go for a walk. It's all about identifying those things that are very, very important and ensure it's incorporated and you're sending that message as well. within the workplace, because it's all about value. It's all about care. If you're not taking care of yourself, some people, just like Gillian said, would just think, oh, presenteeism is the new normal. Let's be present as much as we want to our own detriment. No, that's not the message that should be sending out.
Absolutely. I think that's so important that firstly, the kind of setting boundaries, and they may be different for different people. So for me, I know one of mine is that I need to have at least an hour out in nature every day. And so I have a dog walk scheduled into my calendar every day that people can't put a time in there. That's protected. Yes, sometimes it shifts around exactly when it is, but it happens every day. And Sam, you've joined me on one of my dog walks. And setting those boundaries is really key, and protecting them for yourself and for other people. It's actually the kinder thing to do. It's it's the first thing in that building trust model from Brene Brown is boundaries. You respect my boundaries, I respect yours, I understand what they are. So that's one thing that I think is really key. And the other thing I think is recognizing where you get your energy from. And again, that's different for different people. So there will be things that light you up, that you feel really vibrant after, that really energize you. There'll be things that drain you. They will be different for different people depending on their preferences, but recognizing what are the things that really lift you up and making time for them. And there is actually a questionnaire that people can complete to get them thinking about that we can maybe share in the show notes, getting people thinking about the different types of energy that we all have. So the 4 types, this is based on work by, I forget the names, but again, we could put the link. The book's called The Corporate Athlete, or the article's called The Corporate Athlete. But we have 4 types of energy: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual energy. And we need to look after all 4 of them. And often 1 or 2 or even more of them are kind of out of sync.
From obviously here, there's a lot of qualities which have come out, which, leaders need to have. What would you say are the qualities which leaders in today's world, with this ever-changing work situation, with, more remoteness, with more just flexibility, obviously is the word to use here. What are the qualities which leaders really need to try and work on themselves to improve their business?
I think the need for continuous self-development, that's important. Leaders will continuously see their roles evolve. It evolved drastically during the last 2 years. So they also need to be aware of what might happen in the future. So training and personal development is very, very important so that they can adapt swiftly to any change. Nobody knew that the pandemic was upon us. Actually, nobody even planned for it. Only few organizations had resilient plans in place. And even at then, the pandemic shook it to the very foundation. So, I think continuity for self-development should be an important quality, because the more you learn, the more you are aware to respond to any scenario that comes through.
Yeah, I think that self-awareness that we talked about earlier is really key. I just posted this morning actually about the power of journaling in that. It's something I often recommend with my clients, even if you just take a minute or 60 seconds after a meeting to capture what went well, what you noticed, what maybe didn't go so well. I think from a practical perspective, in terms of supporting the workforce, if as leaders you can get real clarity on what are the 1 or 2 big priorities. I think we have an epidemic of too many priorities, so much so that nothing's a priority. Like if you've got 10 priorities, then actually what's a priority? And as a result, people just feel overwhelmed and overloaded. And actually, if you can focus on one thing, you're much more likely to get it done quickly and then be able to move on to the next thing, rather than if you're spreading yourself over 8 or 10 different things. So getting that focus for people is really important. connecting with the purpose. I think, again, we see people starting to leave. We talk about the Great Resignation. I think it's actually people are getting much more aligned with what makes meaning for them, what they find purposeful. They're getting much more aligned with their values, and they're making decisions based on whether or not the organization they're with fits with that. And they're making choices based on that. So as a leader, being really clear on purpose and values and creating the culture around that is going to help attract and retain the best talent.
Yeah.
One of the things we haven't really spoken about, but which I also think is key, is then using that talent effectively requires you to be inclusive as a leader. So we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion, and to be clear, diversity is one thing. We could have a diverse group of people, but if we've not created a culture where those people feel included, where they feel their words are valued, their opinions are valued, where again they feel able to speak up, we're linking back to psychological safety here, then that's really important. That in turn, when you have that inclusion and the diversity of opinions, thoughts, experiences, beliefs, etc., is how we're driving innovation. We're getting different ideas, we're getting creativity, and that is going to solve the problems of the world. Not to put too fine a point on it, leaders.
Yeah, it's a tricky one though, but I think leaders really need. I think most leaders that I've met, they've really narrowed their focus down to one or two things. Previously, you would see an organization have a focus on 10 different key areas, but that's not going to work. You just need to focus on two key aspects, and then that way, it just helps. Once you build on that, everything else will just fall into place.
Fantastic. So Gillian, bouncing off what you just said about inclusivity and diversity, having studied business management and all that, you get told about quotas in the workplace and stuff like that. Is there any such thing, Edward, in terms of inclusivity? Can you make policies around inclusivity and try and monitor that?
I think the Equality Act, when you take a look at it, that's everybody knows what that is. But when you talk about inclusion, that can only be done from a culture perspective. You can't legislate inclusion in an organization. You need to make, as an organization, you need to make the employees feel included. An employee can walk, on the first day, walk into the room and just feel excluded. And that's just because there's some sort of culture that has gradually been creeping into the organization. If you're not with us, then don't be around us, sort of scenario. And that's why you see positive culture, negative culture. The diversity side of things, that's a separate kettle of fish, because we all know that, we're in a diverse world now. So that shouldn't restrict anyone from recruiting from a diverse background, especially when you've got a diverse group of employees in place. It really changes the dynamics and it brings a lot of value to an organization. But inclusion, it's if an employee doesn't feel safe, or if they don't feel included in anything that happens, then the blame basically lies on the leaderships in the organization. They don't just play lip service to it. They need to live and breathe it. They need to put an enabling environment that screams inclusion, 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 accommodation, accommodation, accommodation. So it's just one that, it's an organizational thing. People can give the required support, advice, and guidance, But if it's just a tick box exercise and the moment you leave, they just pull it somewhere and it gathers dust, then it's not going to change anything. But the moment a leader wakes up and says, you know what, I've noticed a few things need to change. I need to draw a line now, and is sincere about it, then that's the only time things will change.
Fantastic. Gillian, do you have anything to add to that?
Nothing too much. I think just to echo what Edward said is, like, yeah, we can set quotas. That's your diverse, like, you have X number of females or X number of people from different ethnic backgrounds, etc. That doesn't make any jot of difference on how it feels to be somebody from a diverse background in an organization. That comes from the culture. And I think more and more the term allyship is being used as well. So how can you as a leader be an ally to people from different backgrounds from yourself? Yeah. How can you recognize, depending on your own background, what privileges you may or may not have had, and how that plays out in the workplace, and really putting the focus on ensuring that the color of someone's skin, their gender, their sexual orientation, any of the characteristics that we can talk about from a legal perspective aren't holding people back, and actually thinking consciously about how you help lift them up. Because when you've come from an environment where maybe that isn't the case, it's often not the first thing that comes to mind. Our experience is different, and as human beings, we think everybody else's experience is the same as our own if we're not very conscious about it. And so being really conscious about how we can support our colleagues, no matter what their background, but in particular those that are from minority groups.
Fantastic. Regan, do you have any other questions?
Just the one, obviously I'm looking at the questions. I know we've kind of gone off the questions a little bit, but that's good. I think we've gone through some really important topics. But the one was just about the future of work. Is there any changes on the horizon that you guys can maybe see coming? I know that obviously, we know from the pandemic, things do come out of nowhere, but is there anything you could see changing in sort of the near to late future?
I think there'll be a lot. I think flexibility is on the rise. That's a key thing. When organizations are planning for growth, they need to take that into consideration as well and see how they can adequately manage the needs of the clients vis-a-vis the needs of the employees as well. So I think that's going to be a big one. We've all seen what happened this week, the pilot scheme, a 6-month pilot scheme on the 4-day working pattern. It has advantages, but will it work for everyone? I don't think so. Each company can adapt accordingly. That doesn't mean that they can't be flexible, but from a 4-day perspective, so you take a look at departments like IT, finance, and HR that need to be constantly on. And then, other roles as well, which are very, very important in an organization. So it's all about balancing that. So I think when you're planning for growth, you need to take a look at things into consideration. We'll wait and see what happens after 6 months and see what the outcomes are, because what we've seen is the promotion of the benefits, the headlines, people trialing it, jumping on the bandwagon. But then there are some organizations who have tried it that couldn't sustain it, and they had to put a plug on it. So we'll see. It's all about having optimism, and we'll adapt accordingly when we get there.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything additional that I would add that we've not touched on already. I think there are a few themes that I see emerging that will be really important. One is around flexibility, as Edward mentioned. The others I see around purpose and creating meaning for people, around inclusion, around innovation, and around wellness. And I think all of them become intrinsically linked in some ways or another. But I think if as organizations we're not focusing on those, then we're not likely to succeed.
Yeah.
We saw in the news, I think it was it this week, last week, you got companies like Tesla. So they've said obviously everybody has to come back to work, as we touched on briefly earlier. What do we think is going to happen for companies that are saying no flexibility, basically? You all got to come in the office. Do we think, people are just going to get on with it? Or do you think there might be some problems as the years to come? Obviously, I know none of us have a crystal ball here, but I'm just curious.
I mean, one of the things that we need to be aware of is there's a large number of professions where you have no choice. So I'm also chair of the board for a social care charity. We have about 600 staff, the majority of which are frontline care workers. They don't have a choice about whether they come into work or not. So we're thinking specifically about people who could do their work from home versus those that are in the office. I think, as we've talked about, the key is flexibility. People will have learned, I think, over the last 2 years, how they are most effective and how they best like to work. And for some people, actually, that wasn't working from home, and for some people it was. And people will just start to make choices based on their own preferences. And they'll align with businesses that work with their preferences. I think, I mean, I'm very wary of saying like one organization's right or wrong. I think for me, it's about what was the values or the decision-making process behind it. Am I saying everybody needs to be back in the office because I don't trust them? Or am I saying everybody needs to be back in the office because actually a key differentiating success factor for our organization is our ability to collaborate and innovate effectively, and I feel that's the best way to do it. So it's almost the level deeper, like getting that layer of understanding.
Yeah, it's not going to be an easy fix. There's no easy one for this, but I think one of the key things is if an organization has developed a culture of openness and there's a communication scheme that then helps, because at the end of the day, staff will be more aware of what's happening in the organization. And then they're more open to suggestions and see how they can collaborate because they bought into the idea in the first place. But if it's an organization whereby the culture is not so positive, then if they say you have to be here today, some people will be like, no, maybe not. So, you just have to adapt to it, adapt and see, have an open and honest conversation. If there are very genuine reasons behind it, communicate. And hopefully there'll be some that will listen. There'll be some, it might not suit them at the time and they'll make other decisions, fair enough. But there's nothing anyone can do, unfortunately, other than to keep your fingers crossed.
Yeah, and I think like if I was a leader listening to this, like the big takeaway would be actually for all of this stuff, how you make the difference is in the quality of the conversations that you're having.
Yeah. Communication.
If you work on one thing, work on how you're having conversations in a compassionate, non-judgmental, generous way.
Fantastic.
Yeah, definitely.
Excellent. Well, we're going to need to get you guys on again because there's so much more to discuss, and we're out of time as it is. But well, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure, and hopefully you enjoyed it as well. Don't tell us if you didn't, but
please say you did.
It's been fun. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And it's good that you got two speakers that work differently in organizations, and then that's where the dynamics is.
Yeah,
we did say that we were thinking about getting two IT competitors and then making them bat it out, but we decided
no. I really enjoyed it. Gillian provided a great perspective from her expertise side, and I did what I could do in terms of mine. So if you want to find out more or you want to get in touch, the website link is www.hrhubplus.com. we're here, always happy to help.
Thanks for a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I think, as you said, Sam, some of these issues we only kind of scratch the surface on. There's a lot to get at there, but hopefully we've given some insight between Edward and myself and some ideas about how leaders and organizations can focus. If people want to reach out to me or get in touch with me, then my website is fearlessedge.com, or I'm very active on LinkedIn, Gillian Thomson without a P. Yeah, feel free to reach out.
Thanks for listening and tuning in today. We'll put some more details in the description down below for you to be able to go and check out Gillian and Edward's websites and any other resources which we discussed during the show. Take care.